In today's video, we're taking a look at some NHL trade rumors. We're looking at Patrick Kane. Is he willing to entertain a deal, and which teams have been calling Chicago to find out? Plus, Frank Seravalli says that the Oilers still might trade Jesse Puljujarvi. We'll discuss that possibility. We have some really bad injury news out of Philadelphia, another PTO, lots of other news around the NHL, including several injuries as well. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot of news to cover today. In case you've been haven't had a chance to get caught up on your NHL news yet today, there is already 2 other videos on the channel today with some other dedicated discussions around some other big news items, including Nathan MacKinnon signing a monster extension with the Colorado Avalanche, coming to terms on an 8-year deal valued over $100 million. If you want my full reaction and analysis of that, there's a video there, as I mentioned. I'll put it in the YouTube cards. As well, we had 3 prominent players announce their retirement earlier today, including Zdeno Chara, Keith Yandel, and PK Subban. So there's also a video discussing their careers and everything about them. So if you want to get a little bit more of an in-depth look at those news stories, certainly check out those other videos once you're done watching this one. The news for right now, though, we'll start with another PTO with the Avalanche signing Alex Galchenyuk, the journeyman player who's bounced around a lot in the last number of years. Will get another opportunity to go to camp and see if he can earn another 1-year contract, which I would assume would likely be the most that the Avalanche would be willing to offer him if he indeed impresses enough to get that far. Obviously, Galchenyuk could possibly be surrounded by a pretty deep group of players. The Stanley Cup champions do have a few holes in their lineup that they might be willing to bring in a veteran or two, so we'll see what happens on Galchenyuk's tryout. The Calgary Flames might be signing Brett Ritchie. Not quite clear yet if it's going to be a PTO or a 1-year deal, but I've seen reports from different reporters saying that they are expecting something to be announced. When it comes to Ryan McLeod and Edmonton, it looks like the Oilers are trying to finalize a few things before they get that signing complete. I think they're really trying to really work their cap situation. That's essentially what's holding things up here. His deal could be, anywhere from $790,000, it could be $810,000. Every dollar counts, and they kind of need to get a feel for what their opening night roster is going to be. I'm not sure how long this is going to take because they may not know all the ins and outs of that until they get further into training camp. But the salary cap is kind of what's holding things up there in that regard. I don't suspect that there's really any kind of a disagreement or anything between the two sides on what a deal should look like. It's quite likely we're going to see Boston probably sign another PTO as well. I know today, after Zdeno Chara announced his retirement, Chara did hold a press conference signing a 1-year deal with the Bruins to retire in Boston as a Boston Bruin, of course, where he spent the bulk of his career. And Don Sweeney did make note that he's considering bringing in another player in a PTO, and I would have to say that's almost a guarantee that it would be a defenseman, considering they're going to be without McAvoy and Grzelcyk to start the year. They have a few other defensemen now, like Riley and Zboril, who were having some injuries, recoveries over the offseason, just in case they're not 100%. I would think that it would likely be a defenseman, but we'll have to wait and see on that. On to some other injury updates. We got a lot of other injuries to talk about here today. The Flyers, some of this news came out late last night, but the Philadelphia Flyers might be without Sean Couturier for an extended period of time again, and it doesn't look good for Ryan Ellis either. I mean, on Couturier's front, he missed a big chunk of last year with a back injury, and now there's reports that he has a herniated disc in his back again. Some are reporting that he could be out for 6 to 8 months if he requires surgery, but there's others that are saying the team is hopeful at this point that maybe he can avoid surgery and be back in, say, 6 to 8 weeks. But if he doesn't get the the recovery that he needs to play, then if he needs surgery, it's going to be much longer. So there's a possibility that Sean Couturier may not play this year, or even if he does, he's going to be out for the first few months of the year at the very least. This is not good. This is a team that's looking to certainly rebound and have a better season, and they need Couturier in the worst way to have any chance, I think. And then of course Ryan Ellis, who they've been counting on to be their top defenseman for 2 years, has barely played. I think he played 4 games last year, and right now they're saying that there's really no progress to be reported on. And considering how long he's been out and with no progress, also means there's no timetable. That really doesn't sound good at all, and you have to think that there's a real possibility that maybe Ryan Ellis doesn't play this year. This is really bad news for the Philadelphia Flyers. Of course, they're coming in with a new coach in John Tortorella. But really, this team might not be any better than last year. In fact, it could get worse before it gets better. And it's tough to say that considering, how frustrating last year was for the Flyers. But without some of these guys, it's going to be awfully hard to really make progress. We'll have to see if Tortorella can work some miracles or something, but this is really bad news for Philadelphia as they get ready to open training camp. Another name that you're not going to see at training camp, which we were told a few weeks ago earlier this offseason that he was going to be recovered, was Jake Gardiner in Carolina. There were reports saying that Jake Gardiner was going to be cleared and would be able to play this year, and that appears not to be the case. He's not on the Carolina Hurricanes training camp roster. So that says if he can't go to camp, he's going to start on LTIR still. And I guess we'll see. I don't know, really, considering how long he's been off. Another case of, is his career over? He's got one more year left on his contract. And if he doesn't play this year, I think it's probably fair to say that the end is here, possibly. So we'll see on that. So Carolina, obviously not as deep on D as we once thought. That will likely create more of an opportunity for Calvin DeHaan that's there on a PTO. The St. Louis Blues announced that they're going to be out without a defenseman, Marco Scandella, for around 6 months. At least in 6 months, he's going to be reevaluated after having hip surgery. So if he's only going to be reevaluated in 6 months and that kind of surgery, pretty good chance he doesn't play this year either. Apparently, he suffered an off-season training injury of some sort, which has caused this injury, but obviously the Blues have been pretty deep on the blue line. Suddenly now they're not quite so deep. They still have lots of good defensemen, don't get me wrong, but that certainly will create a hole back there on the blue line. And the Maple Leafs are going to be without a couple of important players as well to start training camp, although one may not miss the opener. But Timothy Liljegren is not going to be at training camp. Sounds like he's going to miss all of training camp based on reports from Chris Johnston. And I'm not quite sure exactly how long he's looking at beyond that. It doesn't sound to be too terribly serious, but if he's going to miss all of training camp, you would think he's probably going to miss a couple weeks of the season, given the fact that he'll likely need to get caught up on conditioning and whatnot before he can play. But hard to say without knowing further details of the injury. It's also been noted that Pierre Engvall will likely miss the beginning of training camp as well, although his situation sounds less serious than Liljegren. Doesn't sound like he's going to miss all of training camp, so we will see what that goes for him, but there's still a chance, they say, that he could be in the opening night roster. So lots of big news today as camps get ready to open. Like I figured we were going to learn plenty about injuries and different players that we may not have heard about. Teams sometimes don't bother releasing information until they have to, and this is kind of getting to the point that they have to. Now, onto the trade front, a couple of notes from Frank Seravalli, who made a radio appearance on Edmonton Oilers Now in Alberta on the radio, talking about a few things, and he made one note on Jesse Puljujarvi. He personally still thinks that it's quite possible that Jesse Puljujarvi is moved before the beginning of the season, mainly because of the salary cap situation. This team is really tight up against it, which is what I mentioned earlier, why Ryan McLeod is not signed. And if you take a look at their situation, it's very tight and difficult to say how they're going to manage things. They could go with a 20-man roster, a 21-man roster, and it's going to have to be like moving people between the minors and the NHL is going to have to be money in, money out as well, unless they shed a salary and create a little bit of flexibility. But as it stands right now, they may have to be forced to place a player or two, like, for example, a Derek Ryan or a Matthias Janmark on waivers to go to the minors to get cap relief, to be able to be ready for opening night. Depending on who they want to get in there, they might have to have players like Tyler Benson or Dylan Holloway on that opening night roster to be compliant. It's just difficult to say exactly how everything lines up. Maybe it's not Puljujarvi, maybe it's Tyson Barrie, but everybody's been saying that it's more likely to be a guy like Puljujarvi that's moved. But we'll see what happens. I know there's been reports of various teams being interested in the past. I know Carolina comes to mind. Obviously, a lot of Finnish players there that he would likely fit in well with. They have Ethan Bear on the market. That would create another defenseman coming back. Obviously, Bear started in Edmonton, quite familiar. I don't know if they would do that deal or not. Bear makes a little bit less than Puljujarvi, would give them a little bit of flexibility, give them another defenseman, and then maybe from there they could even flip to Bear, or maybe they just move Puljujarvi for a pick or prospect. I don't know what they do, but given the fact that there's a need there, it could be a deal, but that's just something that comes to mind. Doesn't mean Carolina's going to be the landing spot. There's lots of other teams that have reportedly been interested in the past, so we'll have to see where that goes. And he also talked about the fact that Patrick Kane is getting a ton of interest, even though, at this point, we can't say with any certainty that Patrick Kane or Jonathan Toews in Chicago is going to waive their no-move clause to be traded, but we had no doubt, as we've talked about numerous times before, that Patrick Kane is and will have a ton of interest. He's a dynamic player who could be a big addition for a team going for a Stanley Cup. And of course, with the Edmonton Oilers, this was an Oilers radio show he was appearing on. It makes sense why they're one of the teams that have been inquiring. And of course, it's not really something I don't think they would want to do right now. It's more of something for later. Obviously, Patrick Kane basically said that he's going to play the season out, or at least, for this point, and see how things go. I would think if Toews or Kane is moved, it's going to be a deadline deal. But he reports that the Oilers, the Leafs, and the Rangers are, amongst others, he said, are three teams for sure that have continued to inquire with Chicago and kind of put feelers out there. Now, a team like, for example, that we've seen the Rangers make a trade with the Dallas Stars and trade young defenseman Nils Lundqvist. They got a first-round pick for Lundqvist, and I pretty much would guarantee that when they had that offer come through, they're like, okay, yeah, that could be our trade chip for Patrick Kane. We know the Rangers have been interested before. I would not be surprised a team like the Avalanche make a run for Kane as well. I can see them being in the mix near the deadline, but certainly teams are going to be, reluctant to move their first-round pick in a deep draft year in 2023, unless it's like a home run type of player, and Kane is that guy. And with the Rangers now having multiple first-round picks, that's just going to increase their odds of having the right currency to talk to Chicago to get something done. Obviously, Edmonton in the past has been a little reluctant to move their first-round pick, so time will tell if they're willing to or not. It will determine, I guess, just how serious they are in any kind of potential Patrick Kane acquisition later on this season. But certainly as, the season gets ready to roll around here, no big surprise that those are the teams that Sarah Valley has mentioned has continued to keep tabs on Kane and continues to have dialogue with Chicago to kind of make sure they're front and center when Kane does make a decision, that they will be able to negotiate a potential deal. It's been a very incredibly busy news day, so of course let me know your thoughts on everything down in the comments and we'll talk about it further. Of course, if you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.